She nodded, unable to speak, her heart a tangled mess of joy and pain. I had to, she whispered. I couldn't just leave you there. I saw what they were planning. The grand ball of Thorn Industries was an affair of glittering opulence and silent ambition. Chandelier light rained down on a sea of expensive gowns and tailored suits, illuminating a world Alara only saw from the periphery. As a temporary caterer, she was a ghost, a pair of hands moving trays of champagne and canapes, her face a mask of polite neutrality. Her mind, however, was miles away, consumed by the crushing weight of her mother's medical bills. Every elegant flute of Prosecco she served was a stark reminder of the financial chasm she was struggling to bridge. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart pounding against hers. And then, I put a bounty on your head, he said, a note of self-loathing in his voice. I was a madman, chasing a ghost. And all along, you were right here, as my maid, suffering under Serena's cruelty. Alara's gaze inadvertently fell upon Adrian Thorne, the CEO, a man who seemed to embody the very essence of the event. At 32, he was a titan, a figure of chiseled stone with eyes that held the cold, calculating intelligence of a man who commanded empires. He was speaking to a beautiful woman, his fiancée, Serena Vance. Serena, with her striking blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, seemed to cling to him with a proprietary air. Alara, a simple girl from a struggling family, knew her place. She was an observer, not a participant. She pulled back, looking at him with a new sense of understanding. You didn't know, she said, her voice filled with a profound sense of forgiveness. You were just lost. As the night wore on, Alara noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere around Adrian. He was speaking less, his movements becoming more deliberate, almost stiff. She saw a flicker of confusion in his sharp eyes, followed by a glaze of disorientation. He excused himself abruptly, walking with an unnatural gait towards the private chambers behind the main hall. Alara felt a prickle of unease. Something was wrong. He gently kissed her forehead, his lips a soft, healing touch. I'm not lost anymore, he said, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. I've found you, and now we're going to get justice. For us, for everything we lost. She was clearing a table near a secluded alcove when she overheard two whispers that sent a jolt of ice through her veins. It was Serena, her voice low and venomous, and a man Alara recognized as her father, a rival magnate. The poison works quickly, Serena hissed, a cruel satisfaction lacing her words. He'll be malleable. After tonight, he'll do exactly what we tell him to. The merger will be signed, and he'll be all mine. The man chuckled, a deep, guttural sound. He won't even remember. A few doctored memories, a bit of suggestion, and the great Adrian Thorne will fall right into our trap. Alara, for the first time in years, felt a sense of peace. The man who had haunted her, the man who had been her undoing, was also the man who was now her salvation. She was no longer a victim. She was a partner, a co-conspirator. And together, they would unravel the dark web of lies and betrayal that had cost them so much. Alara's tray clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silent alcove. The conspirators froze, their heads snapping towards her. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. She fled. She ran, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew what they were planning. They were drugging him to force a marriage and steal his company. She, a lowly caterer, had stumbled upon a high-stakes conspiracy. Adrian's investigation moved at a blistering pace. With his memory fully restored and Alara's testimony, he had all the pieces he needed. They were a formidable team, he with his power and resources, and she with her quiet strength and unwavering determination. Desperate, she scrambled for a place to hide. She ducked into a dimly lit corridor, her feet carrying her to a chamber marked private. She burst inside, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door swung shut behind her. And there, slumped in a plush leather armchair, was Adrian Thorne. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow, and his eyes were half closed. A look of profound confusion etched onto his features. He was no longer the imposing CEO. He was a man in crisis, a victim of a vicious plot. They spent hours poring over the documents and files he had Marcus gather. The evidence was damning. Serena and her father, Mr. Vance had been secretly acquiring Thorne Industries stock for years, using offshore accounts and dummy corporations. The gala had been their final move, a desperate attempt to force Adrian into a merger that would give them majority control of the company. The drugging was a means to an end, a cruel and calculated act of betrayal. Panic warred with a strange, protective impulse. She couldn't just leave him. They would come for her. And for him, she had to do something. But what she was just a girl with no power, no resources. And then, a memory surfaced. Her mother, a herbalist from a remote village, had once taught her a strange, old remedy for specific, fast-acting toxins. It wasn't in any medical book. It was an ancient, desperate measure that involved contact. The thought sent a blush of shame and terror through her. But the sight of his labored breathing, the desperation on his face, pushed her to a decision. She had to save him, even if it meant risking everything. "We need more," Adrian said, his eyes hard and cold. "We need to catch them in the act. We need to expose them for the world to see." She approached him slowly, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, her heart a drum solo of anxiety. She was a stranger, and she was about to do something utterly audacious. But as she knelt before him, she saw not the formidable CEO, but a vulnerable man. The world outside, with its glamour and its cruelty, faded into the background. All that mattered was the man in front of her, and the life she was about to save. Adrian Thorne's head throbbed with a ferocity that defied all logic. It was a pain that radiated from the deepest recesses of his skull, a cruel reminder of a night he could barely piece together. He was in his own bed, the morning light streaming through his window, but the room felt alien. He was alone, yet the lingering scent of jasmine and wildflowers clung to the air, an intoxicating ghost that stirred a fragmented memory. Alara, her eyes now filled with a new sense of purpose, looked at him. "I can help," she said. "I can get close to them. I can listen." He remembered the confusion, the sudden, disorienting fog that had descended upon him at the gala. He remembered excusing himself, the world tilting around him, and then nothing. A void, punctuated by fleeting, surreal snapshots. A pair of terrified brown eyes, a gentle, hesitant touch against his face, the warmth of a body pressed close to his, a taste, sweeter than any he had ever known, a subtle spice and a pure, unblemished honey that awakened something primal within him, a taste that had burned into his memory, a searing imprint on his senses. He shook his head, his hand reaching for hers. "No," he said, his voice firm. "It's too dangerous. I won't put you in harm's way again." He sat up, his body aching, his mind racing. He was Adrian Thorne. He was not a man who was weak, who fell victim to schemes. But the evidence was overwhelming. He had been drugged, and a woman, a total stranger, had been with him. He had tasted her. His mind clung to that single, undeniable truth. Who was she? Why was she there? How had she helped him? And why did the thought of her, the memory of that taste, consume him with such a furious, desperate longing? "Adrian," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm not the same scared girl from the gala. I'm strong, and they think I'm just a maid. They won't suspect a thing." Serena, his fiancée, burst into the room. Her expression was a practiced blend of concern and fury. "Adrian, my God, what happened to you? You just disappeared. I was worried sick." She moved to kiss him, but he recoiled. The cloying scent of her perfume a harsh contrast to the natural fragrance of the ghost that haunted his senses. "Someone must have drugged you," she continued, her voice filled with feigned outrage. "I'll have my father's security team investigate." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a newfound admiration. He saw not a maid, but a partner, a warrior. He had found not just his memory, but his other half. He knew he couldn't stop her. He could only protect her. "I'll handle my own security," Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He wasn't a fool. He knew Serena's family stood to gain everything from the merger. And he had a gut feeling that this plot, and the woman who had saved him from it, were connected in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. He looked at Serena, her perfect face a mask of lies, and felt a cold fury. He would find the truth, and he would find the woman who haunted his memories. He would have that taste again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but Adrian's mind remained fixed on a singular obsession. He had ordered his head of security, a former Special Forces operative named Marcus, to launch a full-scale investigation into the gala. But the gala was a world of masks, and the woman he sought was a phantom. "We've reviewed every inch of the security footage, sir," Marcus reported, a look of frustration on his face. "No one saw you enter or leave that private chamber. The camera in that hallway malfunctioned for a full hour." They devised a plan. Alara would continue her duties as a maid, but with a hidden recorder in her pocket. She would listen for anything incriminating, anything that could be used against Serena and her father. Adrian would be her eyes and ears, watching from a distance, ready to step in at a moment's notice. Adrian's jaw clenched. It was a setup, a perfectly executed, meticulously planned conspiracy. "What about the catering staff?" he asked, his voice raw with impatience. "Did you question them?" "All of them." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and exhilarating. It was a game of corporate espionage, of high-stakes deception, and Alara, a simple girl who just wanted to pay her mother's bills, was at the center of it all. But she was no longer alone. She had Adrian, and with him, she knew she could do anything. She was no longer a victim. She was a hero, and her story was just beginning. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, the phantom scent of jasmine and wildflowers taunting him. He knew she was real. He could still feel the echoes of her touch, the memory of her taste. It was an addiction, a craving that gnawed at him from the inside out. He needed to find her, not just to thank her, but because she was a key to a part of him he never knew existed. She was an anchor in a world of deceit. He could trust her, even though he knew nothing about her. The days that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, stolen glances, and a constant and simmering tension. Alara, with her hidden recorder, moved like a ghost through the Thorne estate, her ears perked for any incriminating evidence. Serena, emboldened by her perceived success, was growing more careless. She would boast about her plans to her father over the phone, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. He began to pursue his own leads, his keen mind piecing together the broken fragments of his memory. He remembered the simple catering uniform, the look of abject fear in her eyes, a small faded flower tattoo on her wrist. He expanded the search, pushing Marcus and his team to go beyond the conventional. He had her likeness sketched from his memory, a stunningly accurate portrait that depicted not just her face, but the deep emotion he had seen in her eyes. He plastered the image everywhere, a reward for information, a silent, public declaration of his need to find her. One evening, Alara was cleaning the study when she overheard a phone call between Serena and her father. "The final papers are ready," Serena said, her voice a cruel whisper. "The merger will be finalized at the board meeting next week. And once it is, Adrian Thorne will be a puppet on a string. He'll do everything we tell him to. He'll sign over everything." Her father's voice, a low, guttural chuckle, confirmed her plans. Meanwhile, Alara, living in fear, saw her face everywhere. On billboards, on news reports, in social media ads. She was a wanted woman, not by the police, but by Adrian Thorne, the most powerful man in the city. Her friend, a girl named Lily, who had a gambling problem and a web of shady acquaintances, was the one who had gotten her the catering job. Lily, panicked, told her to stay hidden. "He's a monster, Alara. He'll do anything to get what he wants. If he thinks you've wronged him, he'll destroy you." Alara didn't know what to believe. She only knew she was a target. She had to disappear. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. This was it, the evidence they needed. She quietly pressed the stop button on the recorder, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and triumph. She had done it. She had gotten the proof. Adrian's addiction grew, morphing from a mere obsession into a full-blown quest. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. His focus at work was non-existent. He felt like he was a man chasing a ghost, a beautiful, haunting ghost with the scent of jasmine and the taste of pure honey. He knew the world saw him as a madman, a CEO obsessed with a mystery woman, but he didn't care. He would find her, no matter the cost. He had to. He had to know if she was real. He had to taste her again. That night, she met Adrian in a secluded part of the garden. He was waiting for her, his face a mask of concern. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Ilara's life had become a fugue state of paranoia and desperation. The image of her face, Adrian Thorne's mystery woman, was everywhere. The reward was astronomical. It was a bounty on her head, and she knew she couldn't risk being found. Her mother's medical condition was worsening, and the bills were piling up. The money she earned as a caterer was barely enough to cover rent, let alone the specialized treatment her mother required. She was trapped between a rock and a hard place. She nodded, her eyes bright with victory. "Everything," she said, handing him the recorder. "The whole plan, the merger, the final papers. It's all on here." Her friend, Lily, burdened by her own secrets and debts, offered her a lifeline. "I found you a job, Ilara. It's a live-in position, far away from all this. A maid at a wealthy estate. The pay is incredible, enough to cover your mother's treatment. Just don't ask any questions." Lily's eyes were filled with a strange mixture of pity and fear. Ilara, desperate and out of options, agreed. It was a new beginning, a chance to disappear and finally afford the care her mother needed. He took the recorder from her, his fingers gently brushing against hers. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a new sense of admiration. "You are incredible." He pulled her into a tight embrace, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was not one of addiction, but of love. A deep, profound, and undeniable love that had spanned a lifetime. She packed her meager belongings and moved into the sprawling estate, a gilded cage of manicured lawns and marble floors. The other staff were friendly, but kept a respectful distance. The owner of the estate, a man named Mr. Thorne, was rarely present. He was the son of the matriarch, a kind-hearted and sharp-witted woman named Mrs. Thorne. Ilara worked diligently, her head down, her identity a closely guarded secret. The air was thick with luxury, a world away from the dusty streets of her old life, but a sense of foreboding settled over her. She felt like she was a mouse in a lion's den. Just a matter of time before she was discovered. "We have to be careful," he said, pulling away, his eyes now filled with a new sense of purpose. "They will stop at nothing to get what they want. They are dangerous." Her apprehension turned to outright terror the day she saw him. Adrian Thorne. He walked into the estate, his presence a commanding force that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He was the owner of the estate. She was his new maid. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Ilara froze, her hands clutching a dust cloth. She felt a wave of nausea, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was face to face with the man she had saved, the man who was now obsessed with finding her. He looked different now, less like a CEO and more like a man haunted by a ghost. His eyes, cold and calculating from afar, were now filled with a deep, unsettling sadness. He had a plan. He would set a trap, a final sting that would expose them for the world to see. He would call a board meeting, a meeting he knew Serena and her father would attend. Confident in their victory, he would let them believe they had won, just for a little while longer. And then, at the height of their triumph, he would expose them. He would play the recording. He would show the evidence, and he would watch their world come crashing down. Adrian's eyes, ever searching, scanned the room. When they landed on her, a flicker of recognition passed through them. It wasn't full recognition. Not yet. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible reaction. A twitch of his jaw, a slight narrowing of his eyes. He stopped. He was looking at her. A simple maid in a black and white uniform, with the same intensity he had used to study the security footage from the gala. He smelled something familiar, the ghost of a scent. He couldn't place it, but it was there, hanging in the air around her. He walked towards her, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Ilara felt her blood run cold. She had nowhere to run. She was trapped. Ilara, for the first time in her life, felt a sense of empowerment. She was no longer a victim. She was a hero. She was Adrian's partner, his confidant, his love, and together, they would fight for justice, for truth, and for a future they had both been denied for so long. Ilara's life at the Thorne estate became a tightrope walk of fear and anxiety. Adrian, though he couldn't quite place her, was undeniably drawn to her. He would find excuses to be in the same room, his gaze following her as she performed her duties. He would ask her mundane questions. his voice a low, melodic tone, his eyes trying to unlock the secrets he felt she held. The boardroom of Thorne Industries was a fortress of steel and glass, a monument to power and ambition. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable unease that hung in the air like a thick fog. Adrian sat at the head of the long table, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. He watched Serena and her father, Mr. Vance, as they took their seats, their faces alight with a cruel, triumphant glee. They believed this was their day. They believed they had won. "What's your name?" he asked one afternoon, finding her dusting a priceless antique vase in his study. "Gentlemen," Mr. Vance began, his voice a low, booming rumble. "As you know, our two great companies are on the verge of a historic merger, a merger that will change the face of industry as we know it. All that remains is for Mr. Thorne to sign the final papers, and the deal will be done." "Ilara, sir," she replied, her voice a whisper, her head bowed low. She had to be careful. One wrong move, one familiar glance, and her life would be over. He gestured to Serena, who placed a stack of papers in front of Adrian. She smiled, a cold, predatory gleam in her eyes. "Adrian, darling," she said, her voice a syrupy, sweet poison. "All you have to do is sign, and our future will begin." "Ilara," he repeated, the name a soft, unfamiliar word on his tongue. "You have a unique scent, like jasmine." Adrian's heart pounded against his ribs. He looked at the papers, a web of legal jargon and fine print that would have signed away his company, his legacy, his life. He looked at Serena, her perfect face a mask of lies, and he felt a cold, righteous fury. He looked at the board members, their faces a mixture of greed and unease, and he knew, with a certainty that filled him with strength, that this was the moment. Ilara's heart seized. She had no idea how he knew that. She just smiled faintly and continued her work, her hands trembling. He stood, his voice a low, commanding presence that silenced the room. "Before I sign these papers," he said, his eyes hard and cold, "I think we need to hear a little something. A final toast. Perhaps?" He gestured to Marcus, his head of security, who was standing by the door. Marcus pressed a button, and a small digital recorder was placed on the table. Adrian's fiancée, Serena Vance, was a venomous snake in this gilded garden. She saw Adrian's attention on Ilara, and her jealousy, a deep and bitter poison, festered. She had been the one to orchestrate Adrian's drugging, the one to plan to steal his company. She was a master of manipulation, and she saw Ilara not just as a maid, but as a threat. Serena and her father's faces, once triumphant, now turned to a mask of confusion. The recorder began to play. Serena's voice, a cruel, venomous whisper, filled the room. "The final papers are ready. The merger will be finalized at the board meeting next week. And once it is, Adrian Thorne will be a puppet on a string. He'll do everything we tell him to. He'll sign over everything. Stay away from Adrian, little maid," Serena hissed one day, cornering Ilara in the laundry room. Her voice was low and menacing. "He is mine. And if I find you even looking at him, I'll make sure you lose this job. And you know what happens to people who cross me." She laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. Ilara, her hands clenching into fists, remained silent. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her mother's health on the line. The room erupted into a chaos of disbelief and outrage. The board members, their faces now a mixture of shock and fury, turned on Serena and her father. They had been victims of a ruthless conspiracy, a web of lies and deceit that had almost cost them everything. Serena's cruelty was relentless. She would spill wine on purpose, then blame Ilara. She would leave her jewelry in obscure places and then accuse her of theft. She would make her work long hours, with no rest, just to break her. But Ilara, a woman hardened by her struggles, would not break. She would endure. She would survive. But the pressure was immense. She felt like she was drowning, the weight of Serena's malice and Adrian's unsettling interest pulling her under. Serena, her face a mask of terror, lunged at Adrian, her hands reaching for his throat, but Marcus, with a swift, practiced movement, intercepted her. "The police are on their way. Mr. Vance," Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, fraud, and attempted murder." What Ilara didn't know was that Adrian was watching. He saw the way Serena treated her, He saw the quiet dignity with which Alara endured the abuse. It didn't sit right with him. The woman who had saved him in his moment of weakness had possessed a quiet strength, a fierce determination. He saw the same qualities in his maid. He felt a connection, a strange, undeniable pull that transcended their stations in life. He was a CEO, she was a maid, but in the quiet moments, in the fleeting glances, in the air filled with the scent of jasmine, he felt a profound sense of familiarity. He knew, deep in his gut, that the woman who haunted his memories and the woman who cleaned his house were one and the same, and he would stop at nothing to prove it. The game was over. The lies were exposed. Justice, a cold, unyielding force, had finally been served, and Alara, watching from a hidden camera in Adrian's office, felt a sense of immense relief. The nightmare was finally over. The truth had set them free. Adrian's obsession with Alara grew stronger with each passing day. He found himself unable to focus on his work, his thoughts constantly drifting to her. He would watch her from a distance, her quiet grace, her unwavering strength, her quiet dignity in the face of Serena's relentless cruelty. He saw not a maid, but a woman of immense character. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, press conferences, and a public relations nightmare. Serena and her father were arrested and charged with a long list of crimes. The company was in a state of chaos, but Adrian, with his keen mind and a new sense of purpose, was able to steady the ship. He was no longer a man haunted by a ghost, but a man who had found his true north. One evening, he was alone in his study, trying to make sense of the fragmented memories that haunted him. He was a man with a past he couldn't remember, a void in his life that only Alara seemed to fill. He ran a hand over a leather-bound photo album, a forgotten relic from his childhood. He flipped through the pages, a strange sense of nostalgia washing over him, and then he stopped. Alara's mother, who had been struggling with a debilitating illness, received the best medical care in the country. A gift from Adrian. She was finally on the road to recovery, her face no longer a mask of pain, but a beacon of hope. Alara, once a simple maid, was now a partner, a confidant, a hero. She stood by Adrian's side, her quiet strength and unwavering kindness a source of comfort and support in a world of chaos and deceit. It was a picture of him, as a boy, standing next to a young girl. They were both smiling, their faces bright with youthful innocence. The girl had long, dark hair, and in her small hands, she held a bouquet of wildflowers, a spray of jasmine among them. He felt a jolt of electricity run through him. The floral scent, the scent that haunted his memories, was in that picture. He remembered her. He remembered her name, Alara. They were childhood friends. They had promised to never forget each other. But something had happened. Something had torn them apart. One evening, Adrian and Alara were alone in the garden. The same garden where they had devised their plan. The same garden where he had first kissed her. He took her hand, his fingers gently intertwined with hers. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice a low, melodic tone, "about our past, about our future." His mind raced, a torrent of memories flooding back, a car accident, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, the pain, the darkness, and then the blank space. The doctors had told him he had amnesia, that the trauma had wiped out years of his memory. He had forgotten his childhood, his friends, his past. He had forgotten Alara. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep and abiding love. "What about it?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. Tears, hot and unexpected, stung his eyes. He had forgotten her, the woman who had been his first friend, his first love, the woman who had saved him not once, but twice, from the darkness. He had forgotten her, and she was now his maid, a victim of his fiancé's vicious cruelty. His heart ached with regret and a burning fury. He would not let her suffer another day. He would right the wrongs that had been done. He would reclaim his past. "I lost a lifetime with you," he said, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "A childhood, a youth, a whole life. But I won't lose another day. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost. I want to build a new life with you, a life filled with love, with laughter, with happiness." He called Marcus, his head of security. "Find me all the information on a girl named Alara," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Every single detail. her family, her past, everything. And I want a full-scale investigation into Serena Vance. Every single transaction, every phone call, every meeting. I want her past, present, and future laid out on my desk by morning. He knelt before her, his eyes, once so cold and calculating, now filled with a warmth that felt like a long-forgotten embrace. "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Adrian's journey was no longer about a ghost or an addiction. It was about a reunion. It was about justice. It was about the woman he had forgotten, the woman he now knew was his destiny. He looked at the picture of the two children, their smiling faces a testament to a love that had defied time, amnesia, and betrayal. He would find her. He would tell her the truth, and he would make sure that the people who had tried to destroy him and her paid for their sins. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down her face. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer a ghost. She was Alara, and she was finally home. She knelt before him, her hands gently cupping his face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with a profound sense of love. 1,000 times. Yes, Adrian's plan was meticulously crafted. A high-stakes game of cat and mouse. He would reveal the truth, but on his terms. He knew Serena and her father, Mr. Vance, were growing more confident in their plot, believing they had him right where they wanted him. He would let them believe it, for a little while longer. He slipped a ring onto her finger, a beautiful, sparkling diamond that reflected the light of the setting sun. It was a symbol of their love, a testament to a love that had defied time, amnesia, and betrayal, a love that had been forged in a moment of crisis and strengthened by truth and trust. The annual Thorn Industries Masquerade Ball was the perfect setting for his trap. It was an event of glamour and deceit, a place where people wore masks to hide their true intentions. Alara, at his secret insistence, was to work the event as a caterer. She was hesitant, terrified of being recognized, but Adrian had a plan. "Wear a mask," he told her, his voice low and firm. "And a simple disguise. You'll be a ghost, a phantom in the crowd." The news of Adrian Thorne's engagement to Alara, his former maid, sent shockwaves through the city. The media, once focused on the corporate scandal and the arrests of Serena and her father, now shifted its focus to this unlikely love story. It was a story of a powerful CEO, a simple maid, a secret past, and a love that had defied all odds. The night of the ball was a sea of masks and glittering finery. Alara, wearing a simple black mask and a modest catering uniform, felt a sense of dread. But there was also an undercurrent of hope. Adrian's gaze, when they had spoken, had been different. It was no longer a cold, obsessive stare. It was a warm, knowing glance, filled with a deep sense of a long-lost connection. Adrian's grandmother, the kind-hearted and sharp-witted Mrs. Thorne, was overjoyed. She had always felt a deep, maternal love for Alara, a girl she had met as a maid, but had always seen as so much more. She had always known, deep in her heart, that Adrian's mystery woman and his maid were one and the same. She had seen the way his eyes lit up when he looked at her, the way his cold, impassive face would soften in her presence. Adrian, wearing a sophisticated Venetian mask, was a vision of power and grace. He moved through the crowd, a predator stalking his prey. He saw Serena and her father, their faces alight with a cruel anticipation. They believed this was their night. He would make sure it was. "My dear," she said, embracing Alara, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "I always knew you were the one. I always knew you were the girl he had been searching for. The one with the scent of jasmine." He had a trusted employee, an undercover operative, slip a diluted version of the same drug he had been given into his drink. He had to be careful. He couldn't afford to be completely incapacitated. He just needed the jolt, the shock to his system that would bring back the memory of that night, and the taste that had haunted him for months. Alara's mother, now healthy and vibrant, was also overjoyed. She had always known that her daughter had a good heart, a kind soul, a fierce determination. She had always known that Alara would find happiness, no matter the cost. She had always known that her daughter would find her way back to the man she was destined to be with. As the drug took hold, a familiar fog descended. He felt disoriented, his senses blurring. He excused himself, stumbling towards a secluded chamber. Serena, thinking he was succumbing to their plot, followed him. But Adrian, with a superhuman effort of will, ducked into the room where he knew Alara was waiting. She was standing by the window, her back to him, her mask reflecting the city lights. The wedding was a small, intimate affair, a celebration of love, of healing, of a new beginning. They were married in a small chapel, surrounded by their family and friends. Alara wore a simple, elegant gown, and Adrian, a handsome, loving groom, stood by her side. They were no longer Adrian Thorne, the powerful CEO, and Alara, the simple maid. They were Adrian and Alara, two souls who had found their way back to each other, two hearts that had beaten as one, two lives that had been intertwined by fate. He moved to her, his senses heightened, his mind a torrent of fragmented memories. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently turned her to face him. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his. He saw the same terror he had seen that night at the gala. He saw the same kindness, the same strength. As they exchanged their vows, their eyes met, and they saw a lifetime of love, of laughter, of happiness, of hope. They had been through so much. They had endured so much, but they had done it together. They had fought for their love, for their truth, for their justice, and they had won. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. He tasted her. The taste was familiar. The taste was home. It was the taste of pure honey, of wildflowers, of jasmine. And in that moment, the final pieces of his memory slammed into place. The car accident, the beautiful, kind-hearted girl he had loved as a child, her disappearance, his amnesia, and the night she had saved him. It all came back in a flood, a beautiful, heartbreaking torrent of emotion. The years that followed were a testament to their love, a beautiful, vibrant tapestry woven with laughter, with joy, with hope. They had a son, a beautiful, happy child, who had Alara's kind eyes and Adrian's sharp mind. He was a symbol of their love, a testament to their story, a beacon of light in a world that had once been so dark. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, his mask falling to the floor. "Alara," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "It was you. It was always you." Adrian, with Alara by his side, became a different kind of CEO. He was no longer cold and calculating, but a man of compassion, of kindness, of empathy. He used his power for good, for justice, for truth. He used his company to help others, to build a better world, to make a difference. He had learned through Alara that true power was not in wealth or status, but in kindness, in love, in compassion. Alara's mask fell to the floor, her own tears of relief and fear streaming down her face. She was no longer a maid. She was no longer a ghost. She was Alara, and she was finally home. Alara, once a simple maid, was now a partner, a confidant, a hero. She used her position to help others, to start a charity for single mothers, to give them a chance at a better life. She had learned, through her own struggles, that a person's worth was not in their status, but in their character. Alara's heart was a symphony of conflicting emotions, relief, fear, joy, and a deep-seated ache for the years they had lost. She was in Adrian's arms, the man who had been her childhood friend, her first love, and the man she had saved from a dark conspiracy. He was no longer the imposing CEO, the ruthless magnate. He was just Adrian, his voice thick with a raw, undeniable emotion. Their love story was a legend, a timeless tale of two people who had found their way back to each other, two souls who had been intertwined by fate, two lives that had been changed by a single, fateful night. It was a story of a drugged CEO, a maid who saved him, an addiction that had led to love, and a love that had defied all odds. It was a story of justice, of truth, of hope, and of a love that was a destiny, a love that had been waiting for them all along. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. He held her at arm's length, his hands gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Alara," he whispered, his eyes, once so cold and calculating, now filled with a warmth that felt like a long-forgotten embrace. "My Alara, how could I have forgotten you? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Tears streamed down her face. You had an accident, she said, her voice a soft, broken whisper. You were in a coma for weeks. They said you had no memory of your childhood. She had never stopped looking for him. But a move with her family to a different city had separated them for good. She had heard of his accident through a mutual friend, and her heart had shattered. The love of her life, the boy she had promised forever to, had no memory of her. I remember now, he said, his voice filled with a profound sadness. I remember the car, the pain, the darkness. And then, you? A memory, a ghost of a girl who saved me. And then, that night at the gala, it was you, wasn't it? You used that old remedy your mother taught you? You saved me. We did, sir. We cross-referenced every person who worked the event. There were 142 temporary workers. We've questioned them all. No one saw anything. No one knows anything.